Hey guys, how are you today? This is Jim Prusak here at the Pain PT, and today we're going to go over why is it so important to have this executive control, to get in control of your pain, your symptoms, regulate your emotions, your thoughts. I've been talking lately a lot about how important it is to take control, to set boundaries, to be more active in your recovery and working with this prefrontal cortex. So today I'm going to go over why is this so important? Why do we want to do this? And a lot of the work I do and a lot of the work I share with you guys is backed by science. Okay, I'm very evidence-based as a healthcare practitioner. I want my work to be backed by science, backed by evidence. So I learned this as a PT. I did research myself when I lived in Australia on back pain and things like that. So I understand the science, and I'm really big into the science because we need that to support the work we're doing, to give it legitimacy, so that there's some power behind it. There's not me just telling you this or you believe me. I want you to believe the science. So we're going to go over today a study here, review study that looked at this to give you some of the evidence now for what I've been telling you guys more recently around trying to get greater executive control in your brain, get your prefrontal cortex working, be that CEO, start to be more active in your recovery than just sitting back here and being passively just taking this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to read through a couple things here today to really show you guys the evidence. So the title of this review article is called Executive Functions in Pain. And again, it's a systematic review, meaning they go through and look at many studies. And this is why it's a really good to look at these reviews, because they look at all the evidence across many studies. So this was looking at chronic pain studies, 57 different studies. And basically what they found, generally speaking, is that pain, okay, and we can now cross over, and I would say any kind of chronic symptom, which is probably similar to chronic pain, because we know the mechanisms are the same in the brain, that this chronic pain is associated with poor executive functioning, and that the studies of experimental pain, so when they induced pain in somebody, they looked at 28 different studies, suggest that this might be a bidirectional relationship. Okay, so that meaning that pain, when someone has chronic pain or have chronic symptoms, it can disrupt the executive functioning in the brain, disrupt the prefrontal cortex. But also that poorer executive functioning to begin with might also be a risk factor for higher vulnerability to pain. So that's interesting. So it's bidirectional potentially. So it means that somebody who is, as an example, I gave you guys the prototype person with chronic pain, the TMS personality, is typically the type of person who is the people pleaser, the goodist, perfectionist, the person who's not saying no, the person who's not taking control, the person who's not used to being the strong-minded person, being very assertive, right? They usually have been beaten down. They usually have had adverse childhood events. They've been through things that have created difficulties in self-confidence, self-assertiveness, self-efficacy, all these words we use. And they don't feel strong. They feel weak. They weaken by their pain condition, weakened by things that have happened in their life. So the idea that this is bidirectional is important because it means that, yeah, the pain and the symptoms can wear you down. Of course they can. But on the front end, the fact that some people are already like this, meaning with their personality, is a predisposition for having more pain, potentially having chronic pain. It's important to understand that. So what is this executive control? I mean, what is it? What do they talk about in the research? Well, the way to describe it here is that it's a higher order skill, enables an individual to regulate actions, thoughts, and I would say emotions as well, during goal-directed behavior. So the prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, basically the cortex, there's many parts, is this part of your brain that sort of, receives information, it interprets it, it perceives it, it looks at it, and then it makes judgments, it makes decisions, it makes what is it going to do, how is it going to respond. So this is the part of your brain, the conscious part of your brain, that is a cognitive center, again, and it needs to be working in the right way for us to have an ability to regulate other parts of our brain. So a couple of things that it does, they suggest there's 3 different components. So one is information updating and monitoring. Okay, so we look at that. There's mental set shifting, they call it, which is being able to shift your brain between different thoughts and different things. And then inhibition of these responses, okay? So this is important because inhibition is this ability to exert control. It's called descending inhibition. That's the term they use. Is that we have these pathways in our brain, guys. I shared this with you before, to actually inhibit pain, to cause pain to go down. And most people who have good executive functioning, when they have acute pain, this is what their brain does automatically to help bring the pain down so it doesn't become chronic. So this could be a reason why people who have pre-existing executive functioning difficulty may be at risk for that pain becoming chronic, because it's not coming in to regulate. So an example of this would be you get some kind of pain or something, and your executive part of your brain comes in and says, you know what, not a big deal, it's fine, it's going to be all right, no problem, I'm not going to react to this, it'll get better. But if you don't have that, your brain might go, oh no, I'm not sure, what is this? Hope this doesn't last. Hope this isn't bad. So if you have an anxious mind, stressed brain, a brain that's not able to just kind of put this to bed and think it's going to be fine, then that's possibly a risk factor. Okay, that's not going to create a descending inhibition anymore. It's going to potentially leave the door open for chronic pain to start. And vice versa. The pain itself starts to weaken the cortex. So let me go through some of the stuff here. I'm not going to go through all of this. Obviously, there's a lot of data here, but let me just highlight it. Highlighted a couple things here in the study, in the discussion. So I'm scrolling down as you see me going down the page here. But what I want to show you guys and what the evidence shows is that, and this is in the words of these authors, is that, look, this review reveals ample evidence for a reduction in executive functioning and chronic pain. There was not one study looked at that there was an increase in executive function and chronic pain. Meaning not one study showed that person had better executive functioning when they had pain. All of them, most of them, showed a reduction. There was a pretty good amount of evidence of that. Okay. And that the executive function was negatively correlated with self-reported pain intensity across several studies. Okay, with stronger pain being associated with worse executive functioning. Now, this is partly the reason why is that when your pain gets high, and you guys have experienced this, and I see this all the time, your ability to think clearly, your ability to get control or to be thinking, all right, hey, everything's going to be fine, it goes way down. And partly is because there's an actual blood flow that is going more to your limbic brain when this happens. It's called the amygdala hijack. It's basically sucking the blood. Your prefrontal cortex, cortical regions don't have that blood flow. It doesn't have the, it's not online. I say it's not working. Okay, so this is part of our work with people is to get your prefrontal cortex working, staying online, taking some of the blood and saying, hey, look, hey, I'm over here. I can start to get some control here. I can start to chime in and change my interpretation, change my perception of what's happening. That, with chronic pain and chronic conditions, there's nothing bad. Okay, so we need to use that part of our brain to tell that limbic brain to take some control. Okay, have executive function. So almost all the studies, they found evidence for significant correlation between pain intensity and executive functioning. Okay, so this is important, guys. This is why I'm teaching it to you, and I've been teaching it to you more recently, is because the science supports this, that we need to get this cortex working. Okay, we know that chronic pain has been associated with several structural changes in the brain. When gray matter declines in the cingulate cortex, insular cortex, orbitofrontal cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So all the cortical regions of chronic pain in the brain studies have been associated that there's changes there. It basically weakens. It shrinks, atrophies, gets smaller like a muscle. So this is part of our work, is to get stronger, guys. I say use that word, getting stronger in the brain to combat the limbic hijack, to basically confront the limbic brain that's overwhelming a lot of people. And so we need to do this through the prefrontal cortex. So what they found is that in some of these experimental pain studies that were not just chronic pain, but when they induced pain in some people, that's where they found this bidirectional relationship between executive functioning and pain. That it's not just the pain that causes the brain, the cortex to be changed. The cortex may already be pre-existingly changed, and that puts a person at risk. Okay, so they mentioned here that declining executive functioning might be associated with a higher sensitivity to pain, a worse ability to cope with pain, and therefore to be a risk factor for higher vulnerability to developing chronic pain. Okay, now I believe this to be true, and some other studies support this, that look, this is pre-existing, guys. It's pre-existing in people because, like I mentioned to you before about trauma, PTSD, adverse childhood events, large increases in stress, anxiety. All these things mess with the executive part of the brain, and that ability of the executive part of the brain, the cortex, not working appropriately puts us at risk for having these problems. Okay, so we've seen that from a study here. They mentioned that, this reduced executive function, might be a risk factor for higher pain sensitivity. And one study found that they checked this out. They measured it before somebody had a surgery. And they can predict, based on the executive functioning performance, the extent to which people suffer from pain after the surgery. So it's very interesting. So, and I've seen this too personally. I really see this in people because of the personality traits. So the studies show that poor executive functioning performance predicts pain intensity up to a year after the surgery. That's pretty powerful. So it means we got to get this going, guys. We got to take control. Like I mentioned, you got to get the executive part of your brain, the CO, the thinking part of your brain to step in, to understand this. Look, there's nothing wrong. To use that evidence and send messages back to take control. Again, it's called descending inhibition. Okay, so pain disrupts executive functioning, but again, the other way around, the executive function can make us at risk for having more pain. And what they find here again is that it's the frontal cortex is the underlying mechanism. And I've been talking to you guys about this prefrontal cortex, or frontal cortex. And there's a reason. This is what's happening in the brain. This is the brain studies are showing this. So again, from the study here, they said the role of the frontal cortex in pain is supported by findings in animal studies. Pain can lead to changes in neuronal morphology, decrease in activation of your cortex. The orbital frontal cortex, which is another part of this cortex, it's suggested to play a substantial role in the ability to inhibit pain. Again, descending inhibition is called. When it's not working right, guys, it doesn't not inhibit pain, meaning pain gets to go out of control. It gets to go, it's like a fire that's not being put out. So this part of your brain needs to be working right to help inhibit the pain, again, to bring it down. They also mention here that dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved in the ability to cope with pain. So the orbital frontal helps to substantial role in the ability to take pain down. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved in the ability to cope with pain. And I say pain coping skills are important because maladaptive coping can increase pain intensity and be a risk factor for the development of chronic pain. So how are we dealing with the pain? Do we freak out? Are we getting upset? Are we super scared? Are we thinking it's the end of the world? There's something wrong with me? Those are all maladaptive. We're catastrophizing. We're hypervigilant. These are maladaptive things happening in your cortex, prefrontal cortex, that we need to change, guys, to get better. Okay, so the stuff's real. And what they found in summary is that poor functionality of the frontal cortex can result in poor executive performances as well as in high responsiveness to pain because of the limited pain inhibition as a consequence of reduced orbital frontal functioning. So again, not inhibiting the pain, and limited pain coping skills as a consequence of reduced dorsolateral prefrontal cortex functioning. Okay, so what they say here, and this is important, this is what we're working on, this is what I'm teaching you guys, and I teach with my patients more and more, is like, look, the clinical implication of this assumption they say, is that chronic pain patients might benefit from strengthening frontal capacities. For example, by executive functioning training, which is what we're doing here, to strengthen the system's ability to better inhibit pain as well as better cope with pain. So guys, this part of your brain can turn the pain down, can turn the pain off, turn the volume down. And we've seen this. Dr. Sarno was a master of this. Keep telling his patients, nothing wrong with you. Nothing wrong. Well, that went into the brain for some people, and boom, that inhibited pain through these pathways we're speaking of today. Somebody believes every day, hey, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong. Go back to everything in my life. Boom. Coping well with the pain. It's not getting the better of me. I'm in control, not the pain. Pain starts to come down. Okay, so in conclusion here, what we found is that this review, looking at all these studies, I think about 70-something studies, it shows that there's moderate to strong evidence that executive functions are decreased in chronic pain patients, and that the findings of experimental pain studies suggest there might be a bidirectional relation between pain and executive functioning, meaning what they say, pain not only disrupts executive functioning, but poor executive function on the front end may be a risk factor for higher vulnerability to pain. Changes in the frontal cortex of the brain, especially the orbital frontal and the dorsolateral regions, might moderate this association. So guys, this is why we're going over this. I want to give you the evidence behind what I tell you guys. Okay, it may sound boring or, it's kind of whatever, but this is real. This is what's happening in your brain. So when you understand this and you have evidence is important. I want you to go by the evidence. Don't go by what you believe. Somebody might believe the earth is flat even though you tell them it's round. Well, if they believe that, well, okay, good luck. But the evidence doesn't support that. Okay, so you go by the evidence, but we need to get your prefrontal cortex, your orbital frontal cortex, your cortex in general working stronger to start to take control. You're getting overwhelmed by the pain. You're overwhelmed by your emotions. You're not regulating that stuff. You're getting overwhelmed by these negative thoughts. You've got to step in, take control, get the cortex stronger, like lifting a weight. You got to do the brain exercises, guys. You got to use this every day to get stronger. And you'll see it'll start to really help in reducing your pain. Okay, I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.